They sold her son. She didn't beg. By sunrise, 17 overseers were dead. The plantation was ash, and a slave healer disappeared into legend. The first thing Mara learned about survival was this: pain speaks loudly, but power whispers. On the Ellington plantation, whispers decided who lived with dignity and who vanished without a name. Mara had learned to hear those whispers long before she learned to heal wounds. She listened while grinding roots, while washing blood from floors, while kneeling beside men who begged her to save them and never once considered her human. She was 28 years old, though her back carried the weight of 60. Her hands were scarred not from labor, but from knowledge, burns from mismeasured sap, cuts from roots that resisted being pulled from the earth, tremors from plants that punished carelessness. They called her the slave healer because that made her easier to control. A tool, a function, something useful but replaceable. They were wrong. Mara knew every overseer by sound alone. She could identify them by footsteps in the dark. Caldwell dragged his left foot. Harris breathed through his mouth when drunk. Boone jingled keys even when he thought he was silent. 17 overseers in total, rotating power like a disease that refused to heal. And above them all stood the master, Elliot Ellington, who believed land and people were the same kind of property. Mara never looked at him unless summoned. Not because she feared him, but because eye contact gave men like him the illusion of importance. Her world was smaller, sharper, focused. It was Jonas, her son, 9 years old, thin as a sapling but stubborn as ironwood. He followed her everywhere he was allowed, memorizing plants not by name, but by smell. He knew which leaves eased fever and which ones burned skin. At night, when the quarters fell silent, he asked questions in whispers. "Why do they hate us?" "They don't," Mara said once. "Hate requires effort. What do they feel then?" She paused. Nothing. Jonas accepted that answer with the seriousness only children possess. The day the bell rang 3 times, Mara felt it in her bones. 3 rings meant gathering, meant announcements, meant loss. She was tending to an older man with a crushed foot when the sound rolled across the fields. Jonas stiffened beside her. Everyone did. The plantation froze in a single shared breath before bodies began moving toward the yard like cattle guided by instinct. Mara wiped her hands slowly. She did not rush. Urgency belonged to the powerless. The master stood elevated on the porch, clean and pressed, surrounded by overseers like a living shield. They were relaxed, smiling. That was how Mara knew something terrible was coming. Ellington cleared his throat. "A trader arrives tomorrow morning," he said. "There's a demand for young stock." Mara felt Jonas's fingers tighten around her skirt. "A boy," Ellington continued. "Strong, good teeth, no sickness." The words were clinical, measured, cruel without effort. "Jonas," an overseer said, pointing. The sound of his name, spoken like a price, fractured something inside her. The yard erupted in murmurs, but Mara heard nothing beyond the rush of blood in her ears. She knelt slowly, placing both hands on Jonas's shoulders. He was shaking, though he tried not to show it. "Look at me," she whispered. He did. "Remember what I taught you," she said calmly. "Observe. Don't react." His eyes filled with tears. He nodded anyway. The master dismissed them as if concluding a sermon. Mara did not cry. Not then. Tears were a luxury for those with time. That night, while others wept or prayed, Mara planned. Ellington Plantation trusted routine. That was its weakness. The overseers drank every night. The guards followed predictable paths. The dogs were fed scraps without thought. Lamps were filled by habit, not inspection. And the healer, quiet, obedient Mara, was allowed to move freely because they believed knowledge without power was harmless. They believed wrong. Mara began with observation, not action. Every step after Jonas's announcement was measured. She noted which overseers laughed louder than usual, fear masked as arrogance, which avoided her eyes, which demanded her presence for imagined illnesses. She treated them all. She changed nothing at first. Then, slowly she adjusted. A root added here, a leaf removed there. doses so small they slipped beneath suspicion. Symptoms that mimicked age, drink, stress. A tremor, shortness of breath, confusion. Nothing lethal. Not yet. Jonas was chained 2 nights later. Mara watched from the infirmary doorway as iron closed around her son's wrists. He did not resist. He looked at her once. She gave the slightest nod. That nod was a promise. The traitor would arrive in 4 days. Mara had 4 nights. She walked the plantation after dark, barefoot, silent. She tested beams beneath storage houses, pressing weight where rot already whispered. She loosened bolts a fraction at a time. She scattered powders near the kennels that drove the dogs restless and aggressive, confusing their sense of direction. She counted keys. She learned which locks stuck in humidity. She learned which overseer slept alone. The plantation did not see a slave moving through it. It saw nothing. On the 3rd night, Overseer Caldwell collapsed near the stables, clutching his chest. Panic followed. "Mara," someone shouted. She came running, breathless, eyes wide, the picture of concern. She knelt beside Caldwell, fingers pressing his wrist, listening not just to the beat, but to the irregularity she herself had planted. "Too much drink," she said softly, "and the heat." They carried him inside. He lived, but the fear stayed. By morning, 2 overseers complained of dizziness. One vomited blood-tinged bile. Another claimed he could not feel his left hand. Mara treated them all. The master noticed. "The men are getting weak," Ellington said, irritation edging his voice. "The body reflects the land," Mara replied simply, "and the land is restless." He waved her away, unsettled. Jonas was taken to the storage shed near the river. That broke one of Mara's rules. She had planned for a moving target, a trader's wagon, not a stationary holding. Plans adapt, or they fail. Mara adapted. Rain clouds gathered on the 4th night, thick and heavy. Mara welcomed them. Water carried sound away. It masked movement. It turned ground treacherous. She prepared mixtures that ignited too quickly, oils that burned hotter than expected, dust that choked lungs when disturbed. She placed them carefully, lovingly. The plantation slept uneasily. 17 overseers, 17 mistakes, and Mara, walking through the dark like a memory no one wanted to remember. The night had not yet decided who would survive it, but Mara had. The rain began exactly when Mara needed it to. Not suddenly, not violently, at first. It crept in as a fine mist, the kind that soaked cloth without making noise, the kind overseers dismissed as harmless. By the time thunder rolled across the fields, the plantation was already half blind. Mara stood near the infirmary doorway, listening. Rain changed sound. It softened footsteps, swallowed screams, turned distance into confusion. It was nature's gift to those who knew how to use it. The bell did not ring that night. No announcements. No warnings. That was the first sign something had gone wrong. Or right. The first overseer died without realizing he was dying. Harris had drunk more than usual, trying to steady his nerves. The plantation had been restless all day. Horses skittish, dogs snapping, men whispering about sickness and curses. When he reached for the bottle Mara had left on the table earlier, he didn't question why it was there. Why would he? She had healed his fever once. He trusted her. The drink burned going down. Too fast. Too sharp. He coughed, laughed it off, then coughed again. His vision narrowed. His legs failed him. By the time he hit the floor, the rain outside had grown louder. His death would be blamed on drink. Mara had planned it that way. Chaos does not arrive all at once. It unfolds. A lantern near the stables burst into flame, the oil igniting too quickly, too hot. Horses screamed and kicked, breaking loose, their panic contagious. Men ran toward the noise, slipping in mud, shouting orders that dissolved into the rain. Mara moved in the opposite direction. She passed the kennels as the dogs lunged uselessly against their chains, noses overwhelmed, barking at shadows. She slipped powder into the air as she walked, invisible in the darkness, turning breath into labor for anyone who followed. Near the storage house, 2 overseers argued. "It's sabotage," one shouted. "By who?" the other snapped. "The slaves." Mara stepped behind the second man and drove a blade into the soft space beneath his ribs. He made a sound like surprise more than pain. The first turn too late. She did not hesitate. This was not rage. This was execution of a plan. The bridge by the river collapsed under running feet. Wood cracked, already weakened by weeks of quiet work. Two men went down with it, swallowed by black water rushing fast from the storm. One screamed. One didn't. Mara watched for a second, committing their faces to memory. Then she turned away. Jonas was still alive. That was all that mattered. The master shouted orders from the porch, pistol shaking in his hand. Get control of this, he screamed at no one in particular. Smoke rolled across the yard, thick and choking. Lamps flared and died. Men fired blindly into darkness. They were used to power being visible. Tonight it wasn't. Caldwell stumbled from the infirmary, pale and weak, leaning on another overseer. He saw Mara through the haze and pointed. There, he shouted. Her! For a moment, everything slowed. Mara met his eyes and smiled. The man supporting Caldwell gasped as his legs failed him, powder already working its way through his lungs. Caldwell reached for his pistol. His fingers shook too badly. Mara closed the distance and cut his throat with practiced calm. 17 overseers. The number echoed in her mind like a promise being fulfilled. The master ran. That surprised her. He fled toward the river, boots slipping, breath ragged. Power abandoned the moment it stopped protecting him. Mara followed at a distance, not rushing. Fear made men careless. He tripped near the fallen bridge, landing hard, mud coating his hands. Please, he gasped when he saw her. I can fix this. She stood over him, rain washing blood from her blade. Where's my son? She asked. He laughed, short, hysterical. Gone. Sold. You're too late. That lie cost him his life. By the time the plantation began to quiet, dawn was already bleeding into the sky. Smoke drifted over ash and broken wood. Bodies lay where certainty once had. Mara did not stay to admire it. She went to the river. She followed it north. The trader's camp was 3 nights away. Mara traveled by instinct and memory, avoiding roads, sleeping in brief, shallow stretches. Her feet blistered. Her hands shook from exhaustion. She kept moving. On the second night, she heard voices ahead. White men, careless, laughing around a fire. She watched from the trees. And there he was, Jonas, chained, bruised, alive. Mara closed her eyes for one breath. Then she planned again. The trader never knew what woke him. A sound, a presence, the sudden understanding that he was no longer alone. Mara's blade ended his questions before they formed. She freed Jonas with hands that trembled for the first time that night. He clung to her, silent, understanding that sound was danger. They disappeared into the trees before the fire burned out. By morning, Ellington Plantation was legend. By nightfall, Mara and Jonas were ghosts. History would not tell their story correctly, but freedom never waits for permission. It is taken. They did not stop running when the sun rose. Freedom was not a place Mara trusted yet. It was only a direction. The forest swallowed them quickly, trees closing ranks behind mother and son as if sealing a wound. Jonas's breathing came in shallow bursts, but he did not complain. He had learned silence from her. He had learned when survival required obedience to something deeper than fear. They moved until even the river's memory faded. Only then did Mara allow herself to stop. She knelt, pulled Jonas into her arms, and for the first time since the bell had rung days ago, her body trembled. Not from weakness, from release. Jonas buried his face in her shoulder, his hands still wrapped in broken chain links she had not yet removed. You came, he whispered. I always would, she said. And this time it was not a lie. Ellington Plantation was written into records as a tragedy. A slave uprising. An accident. A storm. 17 overseers dead in one night. No explanation. No healer mentioned. No mother named. But stories live longer than records. They live in soil that refuses to grow crops. In rivers that carry whispers. In the quiet understanding passed from one generation to the next that power is not always loud, and resistance is not always visible. Somewhere, a woman once looked at an empire and decided it would not outlive her love. And it didn't.